Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Suarez, and I'm the Programming Manager at Zócalo Public Square. Our mission is to connect people to ideas and to one another. Everything we do is free and everyone is welcome. We publish original writing and present conversations like this one. You can find us at zocalopublicsquare.org, and if you enjoy this conversation, please like it, follow us, or subscribe. We are honored to partner with LA Commons to present today's event, How Do Artists See the Next LA? I'm excited to introduce our moderator, Catherine Wagley. Catherine is an art critic and journalist based in Los Angeles. She is a contributing editor for the art journals Momus and Contemporary Art Review LA, and her writing has been published in LA Weekly, the LA Times, and various other outlets. Over to you, Catherine.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event, How Do Artists See the Next LA? And thank you, Zócalo Public Square and LA Commons, for presenting our conversation. I'm very excited to introduce our excellent panelists tonight. First, we have Karen Mack, who is the founder and executive director of LA Commons, an organization based out of South LA that promotes diverse community-based arts and cultural programming throughout Los Angeles. She is also a member of the LA City Planning Commission, and she was previously board president of the LA Neighborhood Initiative and board of neighborhood commissioners. Next, we have Rostin Wu, who is a civically engaged artist and designer who makes civic and public artwork. He has worked with organizations such as the Advancement Project, the American Human Development Project, the Black Workers Center, the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, as well as the City of Los Angeles and LA County. His work has appeared in numerous arts festivals and public spaces. Rostin is the co-founder and executive director of the Center for Urban Pedagogy and the author of Street Value, a book on race and urban development. And finally, we have John Malpede, who is the founding artistic director of the Los Angeles Poverty Department, an organization based on LA's Skid Row. It is the first performance group in the nation made up principally of homeless and formerly homeless people, and he founded it in 1985. John also curates the Skid Row History Museum and Archive, and he has created many other works of community-based and public performance, and has received many awards and fellowships for his work. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really excited about this conversation. And there's so much to say and talk about, but you know, the prompt for this panel posed some really ambitious questions about the aspirations and dreams artists have for a more resilient and inclusive Los Angeles, and about how artists can even help us try to articulate bigger visions for the city's future. And I thought before getting into the specifics of everybody's projects, we could maybe just unpack that, grapple with that idea a little bit of how art can be an effective tool for imagining a city's future, or if it even can be, and what strategies are artists using that make them especially equipped to imagine a future, or to do so differently than policymakers and politicians. And I wanted to turn first to John, because the other day he mentioned that art is really good at confusing the categories. And I was wondering, like, is that a strategy, that category confusion that the LAPD has used, that has allowed you to imagine an alternative futures or other solutions differently, or present them in ways that land in exciting ways? Does that make sense, John?
Yeah, it does. That was actually the weak version of what I said to you. What I usually say is, you know, it's the artist's job to confuse the categories, and I think oftentimes this is a very good way of creating openings if people, you know, are expecting one thing and they get something else, and then have to deal with it. And in the case of LAPD, or you know, in our work, we work with in a lot of different contexts and with a lot of different communities and different kinds and people that are doing different things in the real world. And so we can often create constructions that have a lot of different folks involved, and create good opportunity for category confusion and something coming out of that, you know. And I think I mentioned to you, I think when we were talking, I mentioned our project Agents and Assets, which is something we started in 2000, right when the first treatment versus incarceration initiative was on the ballot in Los Angeles. And we worked we were working with people in a women's recovery program here in Skid Row, and as well as the usual members of LAPD, which are other people from the neighborhood. And but we also we also worked with the people that created the ballot initiative, and so that project we decided to take it other places also when there were public policy initiatives happening in Detroit, Cleveland, the different places we went to, so that we could be part of the public education. And we usually formed like 6 of us would travel somewhere, and then we would partner with a recovery program in that in Detroit, say, and also engage with the people who were the policy people who were trying to change policy versus via ballot initiatives or legislative stuff. And it was sort of, so it was like, wait a minute, you're trying to reduce mandatory minimums, but you're also working with the recovery community. This is like mind-boggling that these things fit together, but of course they fit perfectly together, you know. And so showing up as artists was a way of being able to create these configurations.
Yeah. You know, actually, maybe that's a good transition to Rostin, the way you work, like fitting into different, you were using the word tool making, and you often create activities and you're working with these different organizations, and kind of, I don't know, how would you describe the way you use your skills as an artist and designer to work in these different contexts, like community organizing or?
Sure. Well, I guess, you know, one thing I often think about is kind of like, you know, I'd say I try to work on a lot of different horizons at one time, you know, and when you're thinking about building a future that's worth living in, you kind of have to work on all these different horizons at the same time. And so, you know, I think when I think of the work of artists and cultural work, you know, and I think similar to, you know, I think how John and I think also and Karen can affirm or deny this, but I think similar to the way Karen works as well, you know, I don't make a really strong distinction between artists and other kinds of cultural producers or cultural makers. I don't think of it as sort of like artists have this one particular role and other people do other things, and like everyone has these very specific categories. But what I will say is that, you know, culture to me is like the farthest horizon, you know, so even looking at something like the exhibit that's right behind John that I produced with John and with LAPD, you know, there's a bunch of policy ideas of how you could build all this housing in Skid Row, you know, all of which are necessary, and it's important to allow people, you know, access and inroads to figuring out how to advocate for those specific policies. You know, and I do a lot of work that's in that vein of sort of like, how do you sort of bring people into an already existing governmental process, and make that a more inclusive or make that more expansive. But, you know, a lot of the real change that's worth doing, you know, isn't even on the plate right now. You know, it can't be done through legislation right now. You have to actually change our whole culture, and you have to change, you know, the whole frame of reference of what is necessary, you know. So I think that when I think of like what cultural work is particularly geared towards is like that big project of collective interpretation where we talk about what kind of world do we want to live in, you know. And I think that sort of that gets worked out in culture and eventually kind of moves into something like policy, you know, 20 years later. But, you know, I think of it as that like really deep horizon of change, which I think can only be kind of done in the cultural sphere.
That's Karen, the project that LA Commons is working on right now, creating our next LA. I mean, it feels like it's exactly about that. It's like, how do you collaboratively imagine this other space? And maybe you could talk to us a bit about how artists are working with communities in that project. It's across 4 neighborhoods, I understand it. There are about 7 artists involved, and then lots of youth. Anyway, I think we'd love to hear more about that project.
Yeah, just as a preface, and, you know, to bridge what John and Rostin said, you know, I feel like what artists do, and not just artists, you know, it's like what we're trying to do is have everybody tap their creativity. And what happens in the larger society is that that gets beaten out of you very early. I mean, that's kind of what, you know, many schools actually do, is like take that away. And so what we're trying to do is open people's eyes to this expansive view that Rostin is talking about. And so artists, that's what they do. Their job is to create. And so they're making something out of nothing to envision, whatever the situation is. So creating our next LA is about really tapping, the super imaginers. I think of artists and I think of young people, and making that connection with people in neighborhoods who often actually do know what makes sense for their neighborhood. It's just that the policymakers are kind of in a box. And I was reading this article about how societies collapse, and a lot of it is that the bureaucracy gets too heavy. And so like that is what we're trying to break through, is to, sort of give people the chance to think, cliche, think outside the box, so that, we can get to solutions to all of these issues. And with artists, with the example of artists and youth and permission, like, it's okay. You can think creatively. We give you space to do that, so that we can all work together to come up with these solutions that we need. I mean, the people in charge aren't coming up with the solutions. We need to do it. So we're trying to create space for that to happen. And stories are such a rich place, of intersection to, it's like you're building up energy. Like when people start sharing ideas and stories, like, it's just like amazing what comes out of it. And, the foundation laid for, further development of ideas to, move us to the next level. So that's really what we're thinking about with this initiative, and really creating artwork that creates that inspiration to move to that place. So
Karen, I actually want to know more specifics of like what you all are doing. So how does it work? Like you pair an artist and a group of young people, like people in an after school program or at a school or something, and then what do they produce?
Yeah, so we actually just finished a cycle of this, which was, quite extraordinary. And if anybody's seen the flyer for this particular event, the 3 pieces on their work came out of this process, which we, often work with young people who come from a variety of places within a neighborhood setting. Like, for example, Hyde Park is one of our neighborhoods. And then we have a story gathering that the artists and young people kind of facilitate. And then, out of that conversation, what happened with that artwork is that there was a recording, a transcript that was produced. And so the artists, some of them were actually in the room. Some of them read the transcript later. And so they came up with this vision based on the storytellers. So storytellers were selected who captured one aspect. So one person in Willowbrook, our favorite place, Rostin, was a community gardener. So like, that's one person's vision for like a beautiful community. It's a spark for, another idea. The other person that was featured in Willowbrook was an artist, and he talked about the horses in Willowbrook and just kind of what aspects of community he loved. So that's another spark, and this art then is like, somebody else sees and they're like, yeah, I see that, and it's a beginning of a conversation that then, there's a next phase. I mean, what we're thinking about you know, and this is the artist's life. It's like you're bushwhacking all the time. Like, you know, what's the next, like you do it and then you're like, okay, I'm trying to move in this direction. What is it that we're doing next? So what we are thinking about is, what about a storytelling session with the community and artists and policymakers? So then, you know, that sharing happens, and then a next level of development happens, and then, you know, sort of taking it on through. So I mean, my feeling about the whole situation is that we have our whole like city governance structure changing next year. So how do we as creators influence that process? Like, you know, what's our platform? How do we take the process we're doing, gathering community stories at the neighborhood level, bringing that conversation to policymakers who actually get to talk to people at the neighborhood level, and then construct this platform that, you know, influences the outcomes come next March and June.
Awesome.
Do you guys think that's realistic? I mean, let's, like, how do we as artists, you know, influence that process? I'm saying artist, I don't really think of myself as an artist. I think of myself as a creator, but not in the same way that you two are, you know, introduced as artists.
I guess I would ask, for example, what has been a successful intervention of that kind, where you've gotten the attention of the policymakers and this has moved things forward.
Well, and I mean, let's turn it on you. And it's, Catherine, I'm taking over your job, so just slap me down if you want me to stop. But like John, I mean, that's the process that you just described, basically, like going to these different cities and connecting with the different groups and then bringing them together so they can finally have a conversation and actually like understand each other and what needs to happen, right?
You are right.
So, you know, I mean, it's just like, how do you cut through you know, the structure that is, you know, sort of suffocating us, to be honest. I mean, that's the oppression, is the structure that doesn't work for where we're at right now.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, go ahead, John.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I really wanted to talk about the back nine and your and Rostin's work on that, and how it's kind of snowballed into these other projects, the Skid Row Now in 2040 project, and the project you're sitting in right now, John, the exhibition, how to house 7,000 people in Skid Row, which you and Rostin also worked on together. And maybe that kind of answers some of the questions or that Karen just posed to you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So you know, about 5 or 6 years ago, I don't know what, we heard that the zoning was going to be redone for the city, and the new community plans would be coming down the pike, and we thought, you know, we should intervene in that process, and we came up with this project called the Back Nine. And then with Rostin in this space, we designed and built Rostin designed and built, and it was a really interesting dialogue, because we made a performance also that we created a miniature golf course that was zoning and land use themed, each hole, and it told both about zoning in LA and also about the history of Skid Row, zoning in Skid Row, and then LAPD made a performance. So the exhibition was here for months, and for a couple of weekends, and everyone could come in and play the course. And for a couple of weekends, LAPD played, and people sat and watched them play and sort of unpack some of the issues around land use, zoning, and how decisions get made. And of course, the Back Nine, you know, is an old metaphor referring to, private places where decisions get made outside of the public, before the public process or something like that. And Ralston did a fabulous job of getting people here, and maybe you want to talk about the project, Ralston.
Sure, I'll jump in. Yes, I mean, so I mean, to bring it back a little bit, and also kind of talk to some of Karen's questions, like, how do you actually produce something that that can have an impact or starts to move in that direction? I think something that's worth just mentioning about the context of land use planning in really most of America, and whatever, this will not be news to anybody, but just to lay it out, we have a bunch of a very explicit public participation prompts essentially that have been set in place since the essentially maybe the early 60s as a reaction to kind of like urban renewal and like these major kind of government interventions in the development of cities. And so there's all these sort of land use review procedures that are meant to kind of give local input and local control over what happens in a neighborhood.
Oops.
But for the most of like they're like a stage set to kind of indicate that people can have their input, but it's not really where decisions are typically made, or the most important decisions are made well in advance of any kind of like public input session. And so it's sort of I think a lot of what I'm interested in doing is sort of trying to cash that check in a sense of like, okay, you're saying that you want public participation, but like, what would that really look like if we really meant it? If there really was kind of like a creative component of that public process. And so all that's to say is that a lot of the kind of official channels for giving input are essentially dead on arrival. You can't really give meaningful input in through the front door. You can't really just send in your comments and then city planning is going to say, great, we heard that people in Leimert Park want to do X, Y, and Z, like, we'll do it. That's not really, that's, and everybody knows that. That's not, like nobody thinks that this works that way. And yet we have this kind of fiction about it. And so in Skid Row, I got involved through the work of a really great planner and architect named Teresa Huang, who was working with Skid Row Housing Trust to develop a community plan, like a people's vision. What would Skid Row look like if the people who actually lived there or worked there or used it were designing it, not just sort of if this is what the people who have real estate concerns in downtown wanted it to look like. And that was like a years-long engagement, and I came in just at the very end, and I produced this whole document that was a people's plan. And of course that we did a fair amount of work trying to get that in front of city planning and yada yada, but there wasn't really a lot of traction. It was sort of like, thanks for your input. Yeah, great. And I think one of the things that was really striking to me about collaborating with LAPD and doing this work that, for those who are not familiar with the LAPD like style, it's like very in your face and like agitprop and like really amazing. But I wouldn't necessarily say confrontational, but it's not designed to be like to go down smooth or something like that. That's not how it works. And so that process of making this kind of like big absurd golf course and this kind of over the top, very I don't know if the right word, like incriminating play where like there's like people pretending to be all these elected officials who are now convicted criminals, but kind of like playing that all out in public really it suddenly got attention for that project in a way that I think a lot of urban planning projects don't often actually end up getting very much attention. Like it's like third or fourth page in the paper, like, oh, there's like a rezoning happening, it's so boring that no one's really paying attention. And yet those are the rules that are actually going to like structure the way that whole part of town is going to be developed for the next 40 years. And so, doing these kind of these things that work, strictly in the cultural sphere, not trying to go in through the front door of like official input, was really how it ended up sort of getting the attention, and it's still going. It's not, and that's part of this work is that it never ends. You're never like, oh, great, we did it. Now we can like relax and like the city's going to be doing what it's supposed to be doing. You just have to keep on doing it. But there are things that were real wins in that already, in terms of, the city, when we first started to talk to them, said there was just no way they could even touch the idea of affordable housing that wasn't part of zoning, which is, obviously not true, but that was their line. And now, they've created a zone that's, only for affordable housing. That's something that's never happened in the city of LA before. I can tell you're trying to jump in. I'm sorry, I've been talking for a second. So anyway, just things move, and they move incrementally.
I was just going to say that we, at the very beginning of the process, before the golf course was even built, we invited the city planning department to come and talk to the people, the Skid Row residents at the museum about the zoning process, and they came, and eventually they did talk about that. And then they came back to play miniature golf later on. And then we invited them to have a booth at the Festival for All Skid Row Artists that we do every year, where they could spend the whole day getting input from the community. And then, after the exhibition, this group called Skid Row Now 2040, which was a consortium of grassroots groups, not civically engaged activist groups of people whose constituents were people who mainly live in the community and work in the community. And also, had meetings with them at City Hall. And then, so serious dialogue developed with people in the planning department. And the result is what Rostin mentioned, that they really began to understand things that were people in the community wanted, and that people in the community and groups in the community had thought a lot about. And they have written, made many changes in the plan as a result of this ongoing dialogue.
I mean, what's interesting about what you just said is that it, again, it's that relationship building ultimately on some level that, it supports kind of the conversation with the policymakers to actually listen and be responsive, which is one of the really powerful aspects of artistic activity, is the opportunity to build social capital. So if you can get the policymakers to actually come and, be part of the dialogue, then you start to build the muscle, the trust that allows for that true conversation to happen, which is the same thing that we're, trying to do with our project. It's funny. I mean, I like, you were talking about the golf before, and I was like, and then you said, oh, LAPD came and played, and I was like, well, why do the policemen want to focus on planning?
Well, that's our
They need to play too, though, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember we had a whole
What game are we gonna figure out for them so they can get their act together?
This is a challenge for a good question. We put our heads together on that one.
What were you going to say, Rostin?
Oh, I remember, when we first were starting that project, it was sort of announced, I think somehow, that like we got a grant, to do it. And then I remember the city planning called us up, and they're like, we want to meet, we want to, learn about this. And we had like a whole hour-long meeting before they realized we weren't actually from the Los Angeles Police Department. Like, it was like, they're just really like, what's going on here? Like, why did they send these people to this meeting? And it must happen to you a lot, John, but it was my first having that level of mix-up.
The second time that story's been told this week, actually. Yeah. There was another time when we were at a big community meeting with a lot of service providers on Skid Row, and it was sort of the community meeting with representatives of the police department, and there were about 5 or 6 of us from LAPD, and Tony Parker, who had dreads, and he stood up and said, "Tony Parker, LAPD," and then someone else said, a real detective stood up and said, "Blah blah, LAPD," and the other went around, someone from this mission, whatever, and then Kevin Michael Key, who was a huge activist in Skid Row, stood up. Kevin Michael Key, LAPD. So finally he said, like, "What division are you from?" I was stuck having to stand up and explain the whole thing, you know. So it does happen, yeah.
No. Oh, sorry, Karen.
No, I'm just laughing.
It's great. But, you know, listening to what you just said, Karen, and John talking about the LAPD and working with, you know, this is something that I think about a lot. Not all artists work in community in the way that you all do. And it's not easy. It's not easy to figure out how to work in ways that empower communities, or that create the connections, or that allow for the kind of horizontality that Karen at LA Commons is creating our Next LA project. And I would love to hear a little bit more, maybe starting with you, Karen, about how you figure out how to work with artists who can serve and navigate communities in empowering ways. How do you find them? Which artists can do that kind of work?
Well, it's really not, it certainly isn't every artist, and nor should it be our expectation that every artist wants to do this kind of work. But we really, you know, we set that as a criteria when we select our artist, and so you know, they bubble up to the surface. I mean, it's certainly not a perfect process, because it is, you know, often because we like to have artists who are from the neighborhood that we're working in at the time. It can sometimes be a little bit of a needle in a haystack. And I mean, really the way that we're trying to deal with this issue actually is to cultivate the next generation of artists who are capable of doing this work. We're in the midst of developing this leadership development program. You know, we start with 15 to 25-year-olds in our, you know, base program that gathers stories and then transforms them into art. But then how do we move them into leadership and wanting to play this role that bridges art and civic engagement? And that's really, I think, the secret is to develop that capacity, because artists really are powerful. I mean, if you listen to Rostin, if you listen to John, I mean, there's definitely a there in terms of the opportunity to transform communities if you have this capacity available to communities to, you know, kind of help the community create the culture that Rostin is talking about, to change the narrative, you know, through these evolved visions. And so I think, you know, the pipeline is really, you know, filling the pipeline is really, I think, what the way that we see, you know, building that talent beyond the fantastic artists that we already work with.
John, can you speak a little bit about what it's like? You know, you've worked in the same community since 1985, and part of your work has been about, I mean, the Skid Row History Museum exists, as you've put it before, to not only tell this history of Skid Row from the perspective of people who live there, but also to acknowledge that Skid Row has a history. Yeah, what have you found from years of investing in the same community as an artist? Has that allowed you to work toward change that you might not otherwise have been able to work toward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Skid Row has a history, and it's an extraordinary history, actually. And when I bumped into it, I sort of intuitively realized that, and now I realize it more than I did then. But it's a, you know, Rostin mentioned Robert Moses kind of urban renewal, and and Skid Row was slated for that right after Bunker Hill. You know, was completely all the residential, you know, it was a mountaintop removal of a community there, and corporatized. The next chapter was to do the same thing to Skid Row, and it was only people living and working in Skid Row who prevented that from happening. It's an extraordinary history, and I happened to bump into those people when I was visiting in LA and went to the Board of Supervisors, and they were testifying about conditions in the housing. And it was very compelling. And I ended up coming, who knew, I ended up being here for the next 35 years. And, that community was already vibrant, and because it has been a low-income community that hasn't been erased, but in fact, people have moved into those. Some of the housing was renovated. People moved into that housing. The community has strengthened, and it's only the work of grassroots groups of residents that has not only kept the community from disappearing, but has made it stronger and stronger and stronger, and done extraordinary things that have benefited not only the community but the whole city. And an example of that would be the hotel conversion moratorium that was enacted by the city as a result of grassroots efforts here. So
I would say that sort of jumping off at this idea of social capital, which is so important. And, I think the reason why art is very powerful in doing that is because, it allows people to attach to, to capture or connect to their emotional self. And that's where the relationships happen. And that's the foundation for what John was talking about. But he's also talking about narrative change. So really giving people power and control over their own story, and to then, create a different narrative than the one that, the powers that be had in mind, when they were going to bulldoze Skid Row. So, that's part of the work also, is to empower people to say, yes, I can control my narrative. You don't necessarily control my narrative. I do. And, this is the reality that I'm going to create based on feeling that power.
Yeah, of course. If there's nothing there, then it's easy to bulldoze it. If there's a community there, then it's that is, wait a minute, this is my community you're wanting to bulldoze here. So it makes all the difference.
Yeah. Rustin, that's been a part of your work is narrative, right? Like making something you're really good at is explaining to people how ideas or laws or policies that might otherwise seem really alienating actually work, so that they can then, speak into them and feel more empowered in understanding the things that are affecting them.
Yeah. I want to speak to that, but I also wanted to sort of pick up a thread from the last little round. Just I want to, both agree with Karen that, building up some kind of social capital with bureaucracies and people who are in power and decision making, that's important. But I also feel like, it's equally important to, I think, and in terms of what does it mean to create a narrative, I think part of what was effective about Act 9 wasn't just that we'd gotten had a working relationship with city planning and they were like, great, you guys are great or something. I think they were actually also very fearful that they would lose control over the narrative of what was going on in Skid Row, and they were really worried about bad press about what was happening. And I think that, that there is that piece too, where it's you don't, it's important, maybe to have some place for, someone you're trying to influence to go, to have it not be just a complete loggerheads. But, there is a real role for kind of calling attention to, real wrongs and real misunderstandings and missights that are going on. So I think as we're talking about bulldozing various communities, I can't help but sort of think about the kind of very active bulldozing that's going on right now, in places like Echo Park, or I think there's concerns in Lemur Park too, of just who's allowed to be in public spaces and what those narratives are about whether there is something there or not, and I think that we're at a point. I think this is something I'm particularly interested in. It's to a certain extent, I think like I try to make things like that are hard to see more visible, but I think that there's quite a bit at this point that is only invisible because people really refuse to see it. And I think, if you look at our present reality, you don't need any sort of like special artist to kind of like show you that it's really broken and like doesn't work at all, and like this is like our city is a nightmare right now. Like just like the policies we have in place do not work for the people who live here. So those contradictions, I think, at one point you sort of like, oh, we need to heighten the contradictions as artists or as organizers, but at this point you kind of feel like, well, those, how much more heightened can they be, to some extent, so there's this way that I think I feel like myself, and I think many other artists who work in that sort of sphere of maybe like consciousness raising, it's a real kind of crisis moment in a sense, because you don't have, it seems like anybody who wants to pay attention already knows, and is the work really to make it visible anymore, or do we have to be doing some other kind of work to call it different to being? It's obvious that there was a functioning community in Echo Park, and that people were really brutally removed, and so what, like, and you look at the park now and it's completely militarized, so, it's like those things are not hidden things that need to be like reframed exactly. They're really right there on the surface.
Well, and I think that that's why, really activating young people around this stuff is important, because they're not as tired, as we are in terms of just dealing with, the reality. They have the energy. I mean, my favorite thing from the 2016 election is when the 15-year-olds took over the Tulsa rally from Trump. Like, that's the energy we want to activate, because, they're not afraid. And I feel like this is the other thing, I'm trying to lay it out, and this idea of social capital with policymakers is great, but it's really social capital around with the people who then can push back, against the system, and particularly young people, narrative change, and then risk taking. Like, that is the key to all of this. You have to be able to, be comfortable going outside of the norms in order to make this change. And I mean, we're afraid, like we're all afraid. I mean, particularly now, like we're in the middle of a pandemic, there's all of this, it's dystopian. Like, we're living in this dystopian situation, and we just want to like go home and put the covers over our head. But this is not the time to do that. This is the time to take risks. This is a time to think really in a visionary way about where we can go. I mean, that's the opportunity, because nobody has the solutions. Like, everybody's like grasping for like, what are we going to do? So to be able to like empower people to we can deal with this. We don't need a politician. We don't need a policymaker. We can come up with a solution, and then we have to, focus on pushing that narrative forward. So anyway, I'm very fired up about this. But again, my dream is that with all this voter suppression going on, it's like it's no match for the superhero 15-year-olds who can like just take over like the internet and like crush them.
There's a few more questions that I have for you, but a question from the audience just came in that actually I feel like fits right now, which is that what can't art do? What limits do you come up against that frustrate you? Like, and is there anything that art can't do to try to change this conversation?
I feel like that's the wrong question, because it's really not about art. It's about creativity. Like what, I mean, if you want to think about like a painting or a mural or, that kind of thing, then great. But it's really about, sort of getting in that creative mindset that provides the impetus for really making change. You know, if you do think about art like that, of course there's limitations, like, you know, but to really tap people to be creative in the way that Rostin's creative, in the way that John's creative, to, you know, be able to bring that to bear, and inspire others to push back against what we're dealing with is really, I think, where the power is. And, you know, I'm talking a lot, so Rostin and John, please step in there.
Well, I hear you saying is if you call it, if you ask what is the limits of art, then the answer would be, or what art can't do, which would be, you know, if you call it art, then that limits it, or something like that. That if art could fluidly, you know, go anywhere, then pas problem, you know.
Go ahead, Rostin.
I will. I mean, I don't want to be like a wet blanket, but like I do feel like there are things that are needed in addition to creativity. I guess I would say. I mean, I fully agree with, you know, especially what you're saying, John. That, like, you know, why, you know, how would you even start in that in this particular context? But you know, but I guess I don't have. I feel like it's unfair to put it all on like a 15-year-old on the internet to solve our problems. That, you know, I feel like there are actually,
So critical.
you know, like there is like. Well, you know, I mean, you know, like I'm with you that investing in is super important, but I do think that there is a limit to sort of saying like all that art can do is sort of like raise the flag and like imagine. You know, I think that there is a sort of like at some point, you know, like we are running out of time in terms of like, you know, most loomingly something like climate, but even, you know, basic things of like how do we like abolish our kind of like prison industrial complex, you know, like there's so many things that need immediate fixing, and the problems are so clear that I, you know, in certain sense it's like, do we really need, is it really the problem that we don't have any answers, we don't know what that world should or could look like? It's like, actually I think we have a lot of really pretty clear ideas of what that could look like, and what needs to happen is the implementation, you know, and people do need to have power, and people do need to, you know, it seems at this point like, you know, whether this means like taking over our electoral politics or something beyond, like people do need to rise up and like actually take power and create this world, because we don't have, you know, 3 more generations to figure it out. Like we have like 1.5 max, kind of.
I think you're being you know, a little bit contrary, because I think we're sort of saying the same thing in a way, because, you know, I'm really about empowering community, and I think that so often people feel like they don't have a voice because the system is so oppressive. I mean, it's almost like the system is the enemy, not the people in the system, but really the system, which often, you know, kind of perpetuates itself. And so, you know, it's people feeling empowered to push back against the system is what creates the change, as we saw. I mean, like, if you look at the protests last summer, which, you know, like started to, you know, I mean, of course, the system, again, like in self-preservation, it's like, you know, no, the police are not going to get defunded. I am not, you know, like that stuff is deeply embedded. But for a small moment, there was a conversation about actually defunding the police. And guess who was leading that, Rostin? Like the 15 to 25-year-olds, right? Like, so I mean, if people who are willing to go out in the middle of COVID, were you out there? I wasn't out there. Like, the people who are willing to go out in the middle of COVID and like protest what's going on, that's not going to be me. Like, that's not my generation. I'm at home, like, I'm not getting COVID. But, you know, I mean, so if we can support that energy, like, that's sustained, like, you know, I think like something's gonna get knocked down eventually, right?
I want to go way back to something Ralston said half an hour ago, which was that the community effort in Skid Row around the zoning stuff created is now in the plan. The downtown plan includes an affordable housing only area, and it's the only one in the city. You know, and it's obviously something that could be used in. It would be valuable in every part of the city, and I think.
I mean, I'm sitting on that city planning commission. I see the challenge. Like, come on. Don't get me started. So, I mean, that is a true accomplishment to get like fully affordable housing in one area. So, bravo, artiste, for moving that forward.
I think it's also something that could be, you know, built upon, and because of the need is citywide.
Huge. I mean, why am I even sitting on that planning commission and having conversations about it? It's just beyond me. Like, when we have 60,000 people on the street, please.
You know, we should move to some more questions from the audience too. But, you know, I did want to ask you, John, about the new Compassionate Downtown, which is kind of, you know, the performance. It's a performance that the LAPD recently did, and
a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, very recently, and it sort of imagines a world in which people move downtown because they actually appreciate downtown for all it is, including the fact that it has Skid Row and that it has people who are unhoused, and it's a recovery community where many people are recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. And what would happen if people actually wanted to live there because of all of that? And I mean, that's a way of like imagining, you know, pushing us from this moment into a potential future, possible future that doesn't exist, but what if it did?
Yeah, well, it does and doesn't exist, of course. I mean, downtown is marketed, you know, as the West Coast. The aspiration is that it be the West Coast Times Square or something like that, or a 24-hour entertainment zone. As my friend Charles Porter always says, there's like 27. They're supposed to have 27 liquor licenses in downtown, and they have like 270 or something like that. Oops. You know, why is that? So, but it's also true, and really, this is my story. You know, when people used to ask me how I got to LA, I said I got tired of wearing black clothes. I was living in the East Village, you know. I got tired of wearing black clothing, staying out all night, and never going above 14th Street, you know. But what I mean is, when I came to Skid Row, there were people already in the community that were compassionate, that knew how to you know, engage. I mean, Skid Row people in Skid Row have a very sophisticated people skills because they understand, they're compassionate, and they understand how to deal with a wide variety of human beings and with respect, people that work there and people that live there. So you know, and as you just said, it's a huge recovery community, but yet it's tarred and feathered as a place, you know, where it doesn't have a community, where there's drugs, but in fact, so many people have stayed, you know, who used to be in an addiction are living in the community and running. When we did our project, Biggest Recovery Community Anywhere, there were 53 meetings per week run by people living in the community. So that is, you know, a huge, sophisticated recovery community that has an effect. People see people that they used to know on the street who are now, you know, housed, leading meetings, blah, 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 blah. It's a dynamic situation. So anyway, there's, you know, there are reasons for all kinds of people to want to live in a community where they themselves can be, realize their, you know, sort of compassionate abilities and be around people that have a lot to teach them. So it does exist, and it's, even though it's been under threat from the other narrative.
Yeah, there's a few questions that maybe from the audience that maybe jump off nicely from that. And the first is, have you, John, Karen, Rostin, seen any art and artwork recently that offered visions for the city's future that really excited you? Other than your own, I guess.
Right. Let me just think about, remember it's COVID, so that's not quite a fair question. We've been sequestered for
Well,
how long? I'm just trying to, oh, go ahead.
I mean, there's a few things that come to mind, and I think they sort of speak to maybe this like idea of like the other capacities of artists that are, you know, I think are as important in a certain sense. Like I think something that has been really beautiful to watch is like Lauren Holly's work, some everything, and watching kind of like the melding of a studio practice into like also like kind of a mutual aid network and you know, community food distribution. Like I like seeing artists sort of dig into their community and support them in like kind of like expansive ways is something that I think is really beautiful to see, and is something that I kind of see that kind of action as sort of like where this kind of creative capacity is starting to really, I guess not, I mean, it's really needed. I mean, it's truly needed, and it's emerging. I think the cultural event that I've witnessed that was the most powerful to me personally in terms of just like the raw physical feeling was seeing the Father Sarah statue pulled down from in the park across from the train station. And just like kind of the electricity of that moment and the way that it was done with kind of like, you know, not just the pulling down, but also the ceremony and the discussion that went with it, sort of seeing that kind of integrated public action was something that was really powerful. Like like bodily powerful to me to see that. And to me felt like a kind of like a cracking open of like possibility in a way that, you know, only the best art for me kind of ignites.
Donna, Karen, did either of you want to add to that?
I'm still thinking.
The Crenshaw Dairies abolitionist pod, which are, you know, self-sufficient gardens that they are envisioning rolling out around town. And the one that I saw was going to be going over to the housing that Hilda Solis was instrumental in creating after the community, after all the abolitionists in LA stopped the expansion of the county jail. So it was beautiful, and you could pull off a leaf and eat some. And the idea of these proliferating and being, again, they're sort of very ingeniously designed so that they can keep sustaining themselves, and all you got to do is go pick something to eat.
Yeah, I like that piece too. And I mean, it's funny, my daughter's school sent me, and they call me a terrorist. And I just feel like, and that's Patrice Calor's bio, if anybody doesn't know what it is. And I really like love that positioning of coming from love, you know, as opposed to like really antagonistic. That's where that work sits, and it's really beautiful in that way.
Yeah.
Huh?
Well, I mean, I feel like that's where you sit. You know?
That's so great. Oh, that's so sweet. Yeah. But I do think that is that's what we see, right? I mean, this is the problematic situation that the last administration has left us with, is that people don't trust each other enough to give love. And like love is really, you know, that again kind of gets down to the social capital issue. It's like, how do you make change if you hate each other, if you don't trust each other, if you can't feel a sense of connection? And that's what we're recovering recovering from. And it feels like it's a long road to recovery, actually, you know, because like people are crazy, like all this energy on airplanes and on the freeway, like shooting at each other. I mean, it's just like, where are we? So like, you know, just trying to bring that like counter it with this energy of, you know, love and acceptance. And that's another thing about the 15 to 25-year-olds. Like, I can't even have a conversation with my daughter because I'm so thick-headed. I like pronouns and, you know, and I don't want to joke about that, but it's just the level of tolerance in that generation is incredible. Like they don't care who you are. And so, you know, that's what we need to get to.
You know, there are some great questions still in the chat about development downtown, the 6th Street Bridge, and about the way art and artists can be obstacles to a more just future. And I'll just say that because I think those things are worth thinking about. But I also think what Karen just said is a really nice place to land for us. And it's 7 o'clock. And so we have to close here. But thank you. Thank you, John, Karen, Rostin. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. And thank you everyone who was here for the conversation tonight. Thank you also to Zócalo Public Square and LA Commons for presenting this event. And again, to everybody who's joining. This video will be public and online, and you'll also be able to find a summary of this talk and interviews with the participants on Zócalo's website, zocalopublicsquare.org. And if you enjoyed this, you can tune in to Zócalo's next event on Thursday, June 10th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, called Can We Still Find the Good in the World? And subscribe to Zócalo's newsletter or podcast. And again, thank you, John, Rostin, Karen, and everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. So awesome to be with you all.
Absolutely.
All right. Have a lovely night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.